Hello, this is Mark from Enchantment of Eternity. I'm here to give my review.
No, I am a mythology,
Wait,
and I am here to give my review
No, this
for
isn't
Brothers.
your review, it's my review.
Yes, this is my review.
God damn it. Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Brothers, which is episode 3 of season 4 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek, one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the 4th season Next Generation episode, Brothers. So Brothers is the episode where Data is taken over by this program, and he takes control of the Enterprise. No one can stop him, and he locks everyone out of the controls and takes the Enterprise to a planet while there's one young boy who is suffering from a disease and he needs to go to a star base immediately. So Picard urgently tries to take the Enterprise back but is thwarted at every turn. Meanwhile, Data beams down to the planet to discover his father, his creator. Dr. Soong was the one who activated a program that forced Data there, and while Data is reconnecting with his father, his brother Lore apparently was activated by the same thing, and he also shows up. Soong didn't realize Lore was still functioning and apologizes to Lore. Meanwhile, Data is dubious about Lore's intentions, but soon reveals that he wants to install an emotion chip in Data that will finally give him emotions. However, he goes to take a nap. After he wakes up, he installs the emotion chip in Data only to discover that it's not Data, it's Lore, that Lore deceived him. And while Soong tries to insist that the chip was not meant for him and could react badly with him, Lore ignores him and then tosses him across the room, which will eventually kill him. And Riker and the away team finally get control of the transport, and they beam down and to discover, after Lore had already left, and they reactivate Data, who Lore had disabled. And Data says goodbye to Soong, who insists he's going to die there on the planet. And they say their goodbyes, and then they beam back to the Enterprise, and everything's okay. The young boy is saved, and he is reunited with his brother, and they become friends again, which perplexes Data, but Dr. Crusher explains that they're brothers, and brothers forgive. Anyway, so I always liked this episode. It was one of my favorite episodes, not just when I was a teenager, but when I got a bit older, when I was in my early 20s, I would say, or late teenager. But I think this is an episode that the more I watch it, the more I don't like it. I think it's an episode that's, like, the closer you examine it, the more flaws that come up. And I think every time I watch this episode, my opinion of it has decreased to the point where today, where I just watched it, my opinion is very low. And the way I would describe this episode is that it's completely drenched, like soaking wet with plot contrivance. Like, the whole thing is just contrivance. And I just find myself bothered by the premise and not able to buy it. And this time around, when I watched it, it actively interfered with anything else the episode was trying to do, because in the back of my mind I was constantly thinking, no, this is wrong, this is contrived, this is bullshit, this shouldn't be happening. And I'll get more into the specifics about that later, but right now I want to talk about the writers, because we're into season 4. This is the first new review on my channel that I'm doing for season 4, and so I feel like I need to point out that the writers are different in season 4 than they were in season 3. In fact, I talked about this when I did my writings video for season 3, that all the writers left at the end of season 3. In fact, Michael Piller, the showrunner, almost left as well. However, he decided to stay, and Ronald D. Moore, who was like a young, fresh, new writer who joined during season 3, he was the only one who remained. Everyone else, including Ira Stephen Bear, who was like Michael Piller's right-hand man, he left. And so here, I'm not sure if it happened yet by the time this episode was written, but I know that Jerry Taylor was eventually hired to replace Ira Stephen Bear as being Michael Piller's right-hand woman, and who was mainly in control of the writing team, and Michael Piller was kind of, the head guy who just approved all the scripts and wasn't actually there in the trenches with the writers most of the time. That became Jerry Taylor, who a lot of the writers, particularly here on out, the writing staff of Next Generation was noted as being very young. A lot of sort of new ones. Brennan Braga, he joined the show at the start of season 4, although at this stage he's just an intern. He didn't actually become a writer until, I think, Identity Crisis later, which is more than halfway through the season. And another very recognizable name that I noticed in the credits was Joe Manowski. He would go on to be a prominent writer throughout the rest of TNG, and in Voyager, he would move over to Voyager, and actually wrote a couple episodes of Discovery, season 1, the worst season of Discovery. But anyway, Joe Manowski he's a tricky one because he doesn't really do interviews. I think he must be camera shy because like people like Brennan Braga and Ronald D. Moore and even Renee Echeverria and a few others like Jerry Taylor will often do like interviews and behind the scenes stuff. But Joe Manowski, to my knowledge, I never recall seeing him do that. And if he did, it was rare and far between. But there's a quote from him, though, that made me not like him. And this is going forward, though, when we get to Voyager, because Voyager, he wrote the episode, I believe, with Brennan Braga, the episode Dark Frontier, which I hate because it violates continuity. And Joe Manowski was quoted as saying he doesn't give a shit about continuity. And as soon as I heard that quote, I'm like, fuck him. He's a terrible writer then. He's cheating. He's not respecting the franchise. He can go to hell. But to be fair, he's actually a good character writer, which I appreciate good character stories. So I'm sure that he has written some episodes that I really love. Or he was involved with some episodes I really love, to be fair to him. But just for saying that quote, it makes me not like him. And plus he wrote that terrible episode Dark Frontier, which I think is very disrespectful and treats the audience like idiots. But anyway, I'm going off on a tangent because this episode, Brothers, was actually written by Rick Berman. And so now it becomes crystal clear why I have so many problems with the plot. And to be fair, I had the problems before I learned it was Rick Berman. So I didn't discover it's Rick Berman and be like, aha, and like look for flaws. I didn't need to look for the flaws. The flaws knocked me in the face. But when I learned afterwards that Rick Berman was the writer, I'm like, oh yes, that all makes sense now, because Rick Berman is not a writer. He is not creative. Every time he made a creative decision for the franchise, is usually for the worst. Now, there's some rare cases where he's done some good, like he's held Ira Stephen Bear back on Deep Space Nine from ruining Deep Space Nine, kept him at least somewhat in the Roddenberry box. Like he still left the Roddenberry box, but he would have like thrown the box away and pissed on it had it not been for Rick Berman. And also, he wanted to do that stupid ending of Deep Space Nine, where it was revealed that the whole entire show was written by Benny Russell. Now, Rick Berman's reasoning for that is, your show's not the only show in this franchise. There's a whole other franchise. We can't say the entire franchise was written by Benny Russell, which is true. Which is very true, but it's not the only reason. Even if, say, Deep Space Nine was a standalone show and not a part of a larger franchise, that ending would be fucking stupid. So that's a case of Rick Berman doing the bare minimum to be, thank God he was there to stop Ira Stephen Bear from being something so fucking dumb. But I mean, that's kind of a low bar. Like, you don't have to be a genius to realize that is a goddamn terrible ending. So, it's not like Rick Berman is some creative genius. He's not. He's chiefly responsible for writing Endgame, the worst finale of all of television of all time. And when he took over the franchise, he took over from Roddenberry around this time. He was starting to take over. But, when he really took over the creative aspect of the franchise, which is after Michael Piller and Jerry Taylor left. So around, I believe, season 5 of Voyager, and he teamed up with Brennan Braga and made Brennan Braga his partner, which I think was a massive mistake, and I'll get more into that later. It should have been Ronald D. Moore. I'm sorry, but it should have. And because of that, the last 3 seasons of Voyager were terrible, and then they created a terrible spinoff, Enterprise, with 2 terrible first seasons, and the show got better in season 3 when, you guessed it, Rick Berman was less involved. And Brennan Braga was less involved, and Manny Cotto started taking over. And voila! All of a sudden, once you got rid of Rick Berman and Brennan Braga team up, the show magically got better. Imagine that. Who would have thunk it? So I do not think very kindly of Rick Berman. As I'm sure if you've watched any of my other videos, you know what I'm talking about. I don't think the guy has a creative bone in his body. Now, Brennan Braga is another story. It's similar to Joe Menosky, in fact, even more so, where I know Brennan Braga is responsible for writing some of my favorite Star Trek episodes, like Year of Hell comes chief to mind, which he wrote. He teamed up with Ronald D. Moore to write All Good Things, and he's written a lot of good stuff. Like Frame of Mind is very chiefly a Brennan Braga script, and so is Timescape, and I love those episodes. So I'm not saying he's a terrible writer, but he's a terrible showrunner. And I think that's part of teaming up with Rick Berman, and probably Rick Berman had more control over him since he was a young showrunner as opposed to Michael Piller, who actually knows what the fuck he's doing. But again, this is stuff I'll talk about when I get to Voyager, because Voyager never should have fired Michael Piller. That was the worst mistake the Star Trek franchise ever made. But that is, as Maz Kanata would say, a story for another time. Here, with the episode Brothers, okay, so let me finally get to, what exactly do you mean about this is so bloody contrived? Well, I have a major issue with the opening scene of Data taking over the Enterprise. Now, this reminds me of Renaissance Man, speaking of Voyager again, Rick fucking Berman, which was so contrived to make the Doctor super powerful and unstoppable. Now, granted, I don't think this episode is as bad as that. Like, that was just beyond ridiculous. Here, at least you could kind of buy it's in Data's capabilities to do this. But several things. It makes him an overpowered character. I've heard other people reviewing this episode say, doesn't this make him too overpowered? It makes it so Starfleet shouldn't trust him with anything anymore, and he probably should have been thrown in the penal colony because of what he did here. It doesn't fucking matter if it was a program against his will. He should have been, re-examine, maybe have Maddox get in there and like get into his screws and try to find out what the fuck happened and make sure it never happens again. That should have happened. And instead, at the end of the episode, they're like, oh, Data, oh, it's okay. You almost killed a little boy and you hijacked the ship and took it nowhere else, but it's okay. Which I don't fucking buy. Further, the fact that he was able to take over the ship, I actually don't buy. It's not as bad as Renaissance Man, but it's still in the unbelievable territory because... Not because of anything Data did that made him overpowering, but because what Data did was in his capabilities or what we've seen before is talking really fast, using Picard's voice, and like being very smart and tactical. That's all stuff we know that Data can do. What the issue is that their security on the Enterprise needs to be fucking better than this, and I don't buy it. In fact, a lot of people have pointed out that how easy it is to take over the ship just by imitating Picard's voice, which I'm sorry, but they needed some more fucking safeguards. Especially he had a 14-year-old boy in the Naked Now able to hijack and take over the ship. Even if I allow that happened, after that happened, Starfleet should have looked at it and said, wow, that never should have fucking happened. We need to add some more security measures to make sure that it's not so fucking easy to take over the flagship of the Enterprise that has weaponry that's capable of annihilating an entire fucking planet. Trillions of people could die instantly because some jack-off decides to imitate Picard's voice. I'm sorry, it should be a hell of a lot harder. First of all, Picard should have a command code. In fact, this was shown in other episodes that came out before this one, like Contagion, for example. It showed Picard went in when he wanted to do something very sort of risky or very unique. He went into his ready room. And he told... Oh, no, it wasn't Contagion. It was another Season 2 episode. It was the one where Pulaski grows old. Unnatural Selection. Because he wanted to sync the Enterprise computer with this other Starfleet ship's computer. In order to do that, he needed this very special command code. And so he went into his ready room to give this authorization for the express purpose of no one else on his crew, even though he trusts them, even though he trusts Riker and Data implicitly, he still, just to be safe, had to have this code that no one else knew except for him, and he went into his ready room so no one else could hear him and said the code. Therefore, there should be, for what Data does by locking out all ship functions and then putting them on the bridge and then locking out the bridge, and then even once they got on the bridge, he put this ridiculously long, ridiculously complicated passcode in order to unlock the bridge functions. He should never have been allowed to do that without Picard's very secret passcode that only he can do. Only he should have authorization to fucking do that. You know, that's first of all. and so I just can't buy that the security on this freaking flagship of all of Starfleet that has all this advanced technology, weaponry that can wipe out entire civilizations would be this fucking easy to hijack. I just cannot, in a billion years, cannot buy it. I'm sorry, I can't. And further, it also makes me question Dr. Soong. And why the fuck would he do this? It makes it... First of all, it makes me dubious that all he has to do is push the button and Data completely loses everything. He's in like automatic mode. And he's just like, must get to planet. But like, he needs to have some higher functions because he needs to speak, he needs to have passcodes, he needs to know the Enterprise in and out, he needs to be able to imitate Picard's voice, he needs to know how to hijack. So all of his like skills and his memories are still intact, but for some reason not his memory, apparently not his who he is or his personality, that Soon is able to override his personality and just send out a message, get here no matter what. Now, that's not, to be clear, that's not the worst of this episode's issues. That's a very minor thing, because this one's a bit more excusable, but I still don't buy it. But it's definitely not as bad, not as contrived as some of the other bullshit. But what's worse than the fact that Soon is able to do it is more of the question of why he fucking does that. So what happens, Data beams down to the planet, Data beams down to the planet, and then soon you can see before he reactivates Data, because he has to reactivate him to get him out of safe mode, or whatever the fuck this mode is called. Before he does that, you see him fucking around with his communicator, and he disables it. And doesn't tell. He actively lies to Data about it. When Data tries to contact the Enterprise, he's like, "Oh, the ship must not be in orbit. I think they're not here. Don't worry about it. They'll come back for you." Why the fuck does he do that? I'll tell you why. And this is the real answer, not any other BS fan excuses you're thinking of right now, but the real answer is so the episode can happen. So the episode can happen. So the plot can happen. It's fucking contrivance. Now, you you could say, well, no. The reason why he does that is so he can talk to Data and he has time to, spend with him rather than Data instantly leaving. So, several things about that. First thing, why would Data want to instantly leave? Does he have such a low opinion of Data that he thinks, like when he meets his long-lost creator that he thought his father, who he thought was dead, that his first reaction would be, well, fuck it, let me get the hell out of here? Of course not. Of course he would want to stay, and frankly, it shows that Dr. Soon doesn't respect his son enough to let him make that decision, that he has to deceive him like that in order to force him against his will to stay and talk to him. That's fucked up. Like, he should trust that Data would want to stay and talk to him. Like, even if, let's say, for example, Soon never disabled the communicator, and Data calls up to the Enterprise, and like, Data to the Enterprise, and Picard answers. He's like, "Data, what the fuck do you do? You took control of the ship. The kid's about to die." And Data could be like, "Pardon me, Dr. Soon, but I had to take care of that." So he goes up, puts in his passcode, the Alpha 1, 2, 3, whatever, super long passcode, hands the command of the Enterprise over to Picard, but then goes to Picard and says, "Sir, Dr. Soon, my creator, is on the planet. Permission to stay behind." He's the one responsible, by the way, for hijacking your ship. But permission to stay behind because he's my creator and I really want to talk to him. Chances are Picard would be like, "Understood, Mr. Data, but we have to take care of this dying kid so he doesn't die. But we'll be back to get you, and when we come back, we're going to have a word with Dr. Soon about hijacking our fucking ship. But right now, it's more important than saving this kid's life, but you can stay behind with Soon while we do that." Problem solved. But here's the issue. I'll tell you exactly why that didn't happen. Because they needed to have a fucking threat. That was the whole point of that stupid side plot, by the way, with the young kid dying and having this disease, because they need to have this ticking clock. "Oh my God, we gotta take back the Enterprise or this kid's gonna die." And so if you resolve that before the end of the episode, then there's no threat. See, this is why I can tell it's a fucking Rick Berman script. Because Rick Berman always has to have a fucking threat of the week, even when it doesn't matter, even though it shouldn't be there, and even though it actively interferes with the goddamn plot. And I'm sorry, as I was watching and I was seeing like this great dialogue between Data and Soon, and him finally meeting his creator and seeing the good acting. I think it's really good acting, by the way. Brent Spiner playing the several different characters. The whole time I was thinking, this is bullshit. Like, they shouldn't be here. Like, the Enterprise should be on its way. Like, this, he never should have been allowed to take over the ship in the first place. And even if he did, Dr. Stone should have fixed it right away. Why is Dr. Stone holding the Enterprise hostage? Like, if, say, for example, Geordi was not able to come up with this ingenious thing to beam down, they kind of, they would have been fucked. That kid would have died, and it would have been his fault. Why the fuck would Dr. Stone do this? Why did he disable Data's fucking communicator? The only answer to that question is so the goddamn episode could happen. So this is exactly what I mean by this episode being drenched in plot contrivance. And god damn it, Rick Berman is a terrible writer. So how this episode should have went, it should have went where Data, this thing went off in Data's head, and he went, and you know what he should have done? He should have gotten a goddamn shuttlecraft, went off on his own, and then maybe, you could have an action sequence to freaking satisfy Rick Berman of his quota of having an action sequence in every episode. You could have an action sequence of the crew trying to stop him. Data, you're still in the shuttle, blah, blah, blah. And Data does his force field things, and he's unstoppable, gets to the shuttle, fucks off, goes to the planet. And then the whole episode can continue as normal. You don't need the contrivance of, this little boy's gonna die. You just have the Enterprise being like trying to, maybe Data masked his trail, and so that could be the B plot. The Enterprise trying to find out, where did Data go? What happened? Why did he do this? And because the B plot, it doesn't really need to fucking be there, first of all. You could spend more time with Data and Lore. Like, Lore barely appears in the goddamn episode's called Brothers and Lore's. I didn't time his on-screen presence, but I would be shocked if it was more than 10 minutes. Like, he's barely in this episode. And I had often said, even when I was a teenager, like, this episode shouldn't be called Brothers, it should be called Father or something like that. It's not about Lore, it's about fucking Dr. Soon. But then you can say, it's the theme because of the B plot with the young boys who are brothers. But that B plot sucks and shouldn't have been there. So yeah, if it was a good writer, they would have simply had Data steal a shuttlecraft, run off, and focus on Data on the planet, have more scenes with Dr. Soon, have more scenes with Lore, and then the B plot, which you barely need to focus on at all, is just a crew trying to figure out how to follow Data. And then they eventually figure it out at the end. They're there to show up after Lore throws Soon around, just like it was in the episode. See? Fix the episode. How easy was that? All those contrivances that annoyed the fuck out of me, gone like that. But all you had to do is sacrifice that ticking clock thread of the week. Oh my god, we have to save this boy's life, which was fucking stupid and didn't need to be there. I'm sorry, but there's nothing that B plot adds to the story. It has Crusher doing that stupid joke and using like this old timey accent. Like, I think she's impersonating what's his face? I want to say Macho, but it's not Macho. It's like, I don't know what the fuck. That 20s guy with the goddamn big mustache, and was like, I just flew in from Los Angeles, and boy, my arms are tired. That dude, that's who she was imitating. I don't care what his name is. Anyway, like, that was stupid. In fact, it's funny because I'm recording this review shortly after I recorded my review for the Voyager episode Author, where the Doctor actually said that exact same joke. Well, not really the Doctor. It was Tom Paris's like Hollow novel when he hijacked the Doctor's Hollow novel, and he had like the asshole version of the Doctor in order to teach the Doctor a lesson. Well deserved, by the way. But that version of the Doctor said the same thing when 3 of 2 2 of 3, sorry. The 7 of 9 ripoff was like, oh, my arm hurts when I raise it like that. And he's like, well, don't raise your arm like that. And just slaps her in the exact arm. And when she cries out in pain, he's like, oh, don't be a baby. I'm sorry. But that is way, 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 way funnier than that shit Dr. Crusher said. Like, that was kind of stupid when Dr. Crusher said that. And that whole plot about, oh, he went back and poisoned himself and these 2 brothers are upset. Doesn't need to be there. Waste of time. Now, all of that being said, this is easily the best episode that Laura ever appeared in. The problem with it, as I said, is that he's not in it long enough. And that's why they should have 86 that stupid B plot. Not only would it save the episode from all the contrivances, it would have given them more time to spend with Laura. Because I think the aspect of him showing up and Dr. Soon, sympathizing with him, but Data not trusting him. That was interesting. I love the scene when, Laura's just like, okay, that's it, I'm out of here. But Dr. Soon is like, wait, you're not going to get another chance to talk to me because I'm dying. And you have the scene where he's like, what do you mean you're dying? You look fine. Like, that was a great moment. He really, pardon the term, but it really humanized Laura. In a way that I love. It made him like a dynamic character, not just a 2-dimensional villain that he was in Data lore and will be in Descent. It made him a lot more dynamic. And the fact that he was like, I was just watching the commentary of the director, and the line where Laura, tells Data, oh, I'm happy for you. Like, the director said that he believed Laura was being sincere. And Data was even said, like, I doubt your sincerity. But, the director said he felt that Laura was being sincere in that moment. Now, of course, later on he changed his mind, decided to steal the motion chip, but that's in Laura's character as well. But it really fleshed his character out more to have this interaction, so I wanted more of this. In fact, I wish they would have stuck this, not did the bullshit and Descent that they did, and actually had them sort of reunited and not just be evil. And of course they face this again in Picard season 3 with the Lore and Data fighting over the one body and Lore being an evil twin. But I said that was stupid and he was being mustache twirly, but it's totally within his character because he's always been a mustache twirly character. This is the only episode that he ever appeared in which he was not. And so I wish I would have got more than that. Also, it would have been great to have more interactions between Data and Dr. Soon. Of Data sort of finding, asking more about his creation and what he was like, and Dr. Soon sort of maybe asking Data, like, he was seeing, like, checking out, like, how he could, like, rub his tummy or whistle and all this other bullshit. But I feel like Soon should have been asking more questions about his personal life. And, like, how does he feel? How does he interact? Like, I would have loved more of that. I would have loved more of the exploring the family dynamic between all three of them, in fact. So, yeah, I think there was a lot of missed opportunity here that they wasted on a contrived B plot. Yeah. And of course, why didn't Dr. Soon mention that he created another android that was out there that was imitating his ex-wife? And why wasn't that android summoned by this thing as well? Well, you could say, well, her program's more sophisticated than that. It wasn't designed to be summoned by this thing. But the real answer is they hadn't thought of that that plot point yet. That didn't come till season 7. And a throwaway episode that sucks. Or it doesn't really suck, but really, like, I don't know. It shouldn't exist. It was retconning things. I'll say that. Even though it doesn't directly do it, it goes against the spirit of what was involved. They always have to add shit. I always have to give Data so many goddamn family members. I think in retrospect, though, B4 wasn't quite as bad, though. He kind of stays in line with... I think he's right in line with what's been established. But that... I can't even remember her name. You know, the actress who was in Lost and the others. You don't do it because you want to. You do it because you're supposed to. Anyway, what's her face? Yeah, that character never existed. That's a retcon. But anyway, but I do have to say the scene where Soon dies and Data says goodbye was a very touching scene. My only issue with it is that they're in a fucking hurry because that little boy would die, and why the hell did Soon take over the Enterprise? But the scene itself is actually really touching. I do love how Data says, "I won't be able to grieve for you," but Soon says, "You will in your own way." Which, by the way, this is what I love. I talked about this before. I love best about Data is that when they portray him as somewhat human, when he, even though he's an android, he's unfeeling, definitely he's built to resemble human behavior, and I think he does a little bit more than a lot of people give him credit for. Even some of the writers of some of the episodes, I think, miswrote him. And that's what I think Dr. Soon should have been asking more about is the human side of him. But he already seemed to know that when he told Data, "You will in your own way," which is true. It is so true because he grieved for Tasha Yar, as we know, in his own way by keeping that little hologram statue of her, and he grieved for Law in his own way by integrating his program to her. And which, by the way, why the hell didn't he tell Soon about Law, especially when Soon was asking, he was like, "Oh, I wanted you to become a cyberneticist." He should have been like, "Oh, well, I did create another android, in fact," and told him about Law. But why he didn't do that is, I guess the show was shying away from too much continuity, which, of course, this episode, again, was written by fucking Rick Berman, who hates continuity. But anyway. Another thing I was listening to the commentator, they were saying about the Data taking over the ship at the start of the episode, that Data is, this reminds the audience that he's an android and that he's dangerous, and that if you just flip a switch he could do all this stuff. And I was like, but you shouldn't. That's a bad thing. That shouldn't exist. As I said, the Starfleet should have considered him a security risk going forward and deactivated him, or done super research to ensure this didn't happen again, or stripped him of his command or his title or his rank for doing that bullshit, being we can no longer trust you. You can't just have everything go back to normal after doing something like that. That's fucking stupid. There need to be consequences for that. But of course, Rick Berman doesn't know the meaning of the word consequences. Anyway. And there's some other reviewers that I watch the reviews of Star Trek episodes, and going forward, every time Data does something, they bring this up again and be like, well, he's this robot that you can't trust, who could just steal the Enterprise at any second. And it's annoying to me that they keep doing that, but they're not wrong. This episode really set this stupid precedent, the dangerous precedent that should never fucking exist. You shouldn't show him as a simple robot. Data's always best, and he's always a more interesting character because he's not a simple robot. You shouldn't show him as a simple robot that all one had to do is press a button to turn him evil and hijack the ship. That's something you do not want to do. So I really hate it. I really, really hate it. Now, another thing I wanted to talk about with this episode is the music. I know I'm bringing out the music again. This is a Ron Jones score, and I always harp on Ron Jones only because people put him on too high of a pedestal. And to be fair, if you saw my top 10 favorite scores of Star Trek, you would see I had a couple of Ron Jones episodes in my top 10, such as The Defector, which I think the score for that is simply amazing. And my number one favorite score in all of Next Generation was Best of Both Worlds, the Ron Jones score, which I think is the best score in maybe all of Star Trek. Or at least TV, as we're showing them, not movies. But yeah, so it's not that I totally hate Ron Jones. I just like Dennis McCarthy better, and part of the reason is I hate the score for this episode. I'm sorry, I do. It is too much. It's a throwback to Season 1. It sounds like a Season 1 score. It uses lots of those cheesy sounding, 80s sounding synths. You know, it's funny because as I was going through Season 3, I've gotten a few comments saying, well, this episode felt like a Season 1 or Season 2 episode. And I disagree. I don't think there was a single episode of Season 3 that felt like a Season 1 or 2 episode. I think and all of Season 3 was beyond the level of Season 1 and 2. And I even harped on at the end of Allegiance when there's these reviewers that said, because he used this lighthearted comedic musical cue, and they're like, oh, it's Season 1 music. And I went off saying, no, it's not Season 1 music, god damn it. And it wasn't. But this is. This is the first throwback. Now, it's not the episode itself that is a throwback to Season 1, but the music is. The music seems like you could have taken this right out of something like When the Bow Breaks or one of those stupid cheesy episodes in Season 1. It's not good. It just uses those synths and the cheesy, it sounds like, you know, 80s sitcom-y, which is what the Season 1, 2 music sounded like. But the exception to that, to be fair, is the last cue, which something that always stuck with me and I always remembered. In fact, when I used to like this episode, it was mainly because of that ending moment, which the musical cue was the main factor on, where Crusher says the line of they're brothers, Data. Brothers forgive. And then they play this really nice musical cue, which I do love. So it's the only good musical part of the episode, where they do that dun 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 dun, and then the camera like sort of moves and zooms in and focuses on a close up of Data as he's sort of considering those words. And I think that's the reason why I love that scene so much and why I love that musical cue so much, is that it, again, like I just said, it portrays Data as being more than just a robot. It portrays him as a very sort of thoughtful moment. And this is the main reason why I used to love this episode. Whenever I thought about why I love this episode so much, instantly that ending scene came to mind. It was my favorite moment because the music really enhances and sells the moment that Data is affected by that, and that he's reconsidering his feelings for Lore and reconsidering loving him. But of course, all that's undone in Lore's next appearance when he just goes back to be a mustache twirly villain again who manipulates Data. But that's, I'll get to that eventually. So that moment is kind of undone by that. But it would have been much better if Lore and Data were able to reconcile, and that they made it so Lore wasn't evil. I think that would have been a much better way to go, and this ending kind of hinted at that maybe he can forgive Lore. So that part I thought was really powerful. But I think when I used to love that episode, for that moment, I was just ignoring all the bullshit that came before it. And to be honest, I wasn't really paying attention, which is why I think, as I said, this is an episode like the further you look into it, the further you analyze it, and the further you examine it, the more it falls apart. And my favorite episodes of Star Trek are the opposite. The more you analyze it, the more you look into it, the greater it becomes. You discover more nuance, more creative character work and commentary. Like, those are the best episodes of Star Trek. The ones like this, that the more you examine it, it just completely falls apart and you see it's all just contrivance and bad writing. You get this episode. So anyway, I would now like to thank my Patrons, supporters, for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It does help me continue with the episode, so I'll give a quick shout out to Antarius, Tatson, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Valls, Alessandro Miguelisio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neal Howells. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So, we do have a few patron comments on this episode. First comment is from Kyrie091, who says, "Brothers, more like others." You know, the bad guys from the first couple seasons of Lost, the others. I don't know. I'm out of ideas. Whatever. Kyrie091, I will just say, it's never a good sign when you have to explain your joke. Just saying. Anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, "This was a great episode. If anyone else did what Data did, taking control of the Enterprise, it would be completely ridiculous. Mark's best friend, Rick Berman, wrote this episode." You better believe I talked about that. My rating is 9 times Brent Spiner played different versions of Soong out of 10. Probably was 9 times. Anyway, next comment. Different relatives of Soong. This is the only time he plays Dr. Noonie in Soong. Actually, no, there's a holodeck sequence in that Inheritance episode where he plays it. And then there's the dream sequence in season 6. Okay, so he plays Dr. Soong a couple times, but mainly it's like different family members in the Soong ancestors or whatnot. That's stupid. But anyway, next comment is from Greg Marley, who says, "One of my favorite episodes, mostly for seeing Data take over the ship. Though, as people have pointed out, it shows what a walking security problem Data would actually be. Still, very good acting from Brent Spiner in all 3 roles." There's a lot more issues than that than just the security risk that Data is. That's definitely one of them, but I've already talked about that. So next comment is from Ricky, who says, "To me, this is the one and truly good episode of Lore, as he didn't come across as cheesy as he did previously in Season 1 or in the future in Season 7, but I think this is by far the best Data and Lore dynamic and interactions that we get. I think the beginning part of this episode was really suspenseful and a great hook when Data took control of the Enterprise. And even though the episode slows down, it still has great moments with Dr. Noonie and Soong. And I will say, for the record, that I hate the other uses and appearances of Dr. Soong in all of seasons of Picard, especially the evil, dumb, senseless version of him in that god-awful Season 2 of Picard. So yeah, I also believed this may be Brent Spiner's best episode portraying 3 different characters in these scenes. He did a great job. Also, the ending was a bit touching when the Doctor died, and I liked the final scene where the 2 young brothers made up and forgive each other, and Data observed and asked Dr. Crusher about it, and she said, "Because brothers forgive." And the look on Data's face was really great and touching. So my rating is 8 out of 10. I do agree with you. Like, we're on the same page on some things. Like, I agree about the Data and Lore dynamic being the best. I agree that the interactions with Soong and Data were good. I agree that Brent Spiner did a great job in this episode. And I agree that ending moment was really powerful. But I disagree about the Data taking over the Enterprise stuff. Anyway, next comment is from Brandon Neilhouse, who says, "Sorry, but I don't think much of this episode. Why does no one in Starfleet realize how dangerous Data can be when he gets taken over? See Star Trek Insurrection for further example of this. Why is Will Riker so hard on Jake Potts? He's not in Starfleet. And why are the boys' parents not informed about Willie's condition? Haven't we got a bit advanced for jokes about doctors with Jewish accents in the 24th century? It just doesn't sit right with me. Where shall I start with the often wrong Soon? His terrible makeup, the worst since Too Short a Season, or the fact that instead of trying to repair Lore, he immediately discards him and constructs a better model? If I was Lore, I'd be feeling resentful too. Lore is a character I find increasingly hard to like. In this episode, he comes across like a darker, mocking version of Trelane. I wonder why Data didn't tell Soong about Law. 4 evil androids rescued by the Packlets out of 10. Yeah, that's a good question. Why didn't Data tell Soong about Law? That is a very good question. Now, I tried really hard, but the one line where Brandon says, "Why is Riker so hard on Jake Potts? He's not in Starfleet." Which, by the way, something I noticed, that the actor who was in the episode of Move Along Home in Deep Space Nine, who Odo said that to, where he goes, "I'm not in Starfleet," that security guy, that actor's in this episode. He's in engineering, and every time I saw him, I was like, every time he was like, "Oh, Commander LaForge, I can't do this or whatever, I'm locked out," Geordi should have went, "Well, then you shouldn't be in Starfleet." Sorry, that's an end joke. If you've never seen my videos before, you don't know how much I love that line. But anyway, yeah, the Dr. Soon's makeup was really terrible. I actually agree with that. He was actually supposed to be played by a different actor originally, but then Brent Spiner went to the producers when he saw that and was like, "Well, shouldn't I be playing him?" And so the producer was like, yeah, sure, you can play him. But then once Brent Spiner got into doing this, he was like, "Oh shit, now what the fuck did I give myself so much work for?" I think it would have been better if they didn't do. But then if you didn't do that, then all those different other ancestors of Soong couldn't be played by Brent Spiner, which they shouldn't fucking be anyway. I'm sorry, that's so stupid. Anyway, let's see. Next comment is from Norman Buchwald, who says, "This is what I think is an overrated episode, even though it is the only Lore episode really worth watching in the entire franchise. I did watch this as a rerun on first viewing, so I already knew certain things, but the really good part was how Data is controlled remotely, and what he does is fantastic. And always better than similar 7 of 9 escapes in The Raven. But I was not impressed with Soon. He reminded me a little bit of Yoda on first viewing, and while I later appreciate this Soon as the only one decently written and acted, it's still not saying much. Lore is still limited, but at least we get enough of his sibling rivalry feel that at least seemed real. When in later viewings I saw the writer's credit of Rick Berman, I finally realized, that explains some of that writing limitations, even though it's one of his best efforts. And baloney, by the way, Soon would have not been left behind and immediately brought up to sickbay. The two kids are annoying B-plot and just plain bad. I used to give it 4. I'll move it up to 5 very long passwords out of 10. Yeah, that whole thing with them leaving soon to die on the planet, I don't buy that. Just because it's like, oh, I don't want to die anywhere else. It would have been like, too fucking bad. We're beaming you up against your will because maybe, just maybe, we can save your fucking life. Now, I know he was like, oh, I'm dying. But is he really? He's not a medical doctor, need I remind you. He's a cyberneticist. Maybe Crusher could have saved his life. But they're like, fuck it. The plot wants him to die, so we'll leave him behind. Yeah, the more I talk about this episode, the more I don't like it. And it does seem that the patrons were kind of split on this one. Anyway, thank you, patrons, so much for your comments. So my rating, which I've been fluctuating in my head the whole time I've been reviewing this, but my rating for Brothers out of 10 is going to be a 5 average. I was I really wanted to give. I was very this close to giving this episode a 4, but there is a lot I like about this episode. As I said, I like the Brent Spiner's performances. I like the interactions of Data and Sung that we do get, even though arguably it should have been more, but I still like what we did get. I like Laura's. His characterization here is the best the show's ever done and actually made him a dynamic character. That's a huge positive. And I like the ending where, that Brothers Forgive line and with the good musical thing. That was a very powerful ending. And it used to be the main reason why I would give this episode a 9, or it was because of that ending, which was so good. But if I judge the episode as a whole, not just that ending scene, as I said, it's drenched and plot contrivance that sets dangerous precedents, that doesn't make any sense. A lot of bullshit had to happen just so the plot could happen, just so they could have this stupid threat of the B plot that shouldn't have been there in the first place. And Data should have never been trusted with Starfleet work again. Dr. Soon, if he didn't die, should have been arrested and spent the rest of his life in the penal colony for nearly killing a young boy and stealing Starfleet property just for the fuck of it and disabling Data's communicator for no good goddamn reason. And that makeup is horrible, and the music was bad. So I was really close to giving this episode a 4, but I will be generous and give it a 5, which I do believe is much lower than I've ever given this episode before. But yeah, this viewing just made me think so much lesser of this episode. Anyway, that is it for my review of Brothers. So coming up next on my channel this Saturday will be my review for Suddenly Human. Monday will be my review for Remember Me. And then on Wednesday, going to be doing something different. I'm going to count down the top 25 worst episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise. Now, I've already done my top 10, which I did a video for each of them. So this video will be for my number 25 through 11. And then I'll probably speed through my 10 to 1 just to remind people so it can be in one video. But mainly focusing on number 25 through 11, which I haven't mentioned yet on my channel. So that's what's coming up on my channel. So be sure to check it out for that and many more Star Trek reviews. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.